Namaskar and welcome to episode number 19 of Understanding Consciousness podcast, where we are finally concluding the paper that we started a few episodes ago about the visual attenuation, sensory attenuation because of your own hand movements. For those who have just joined us, this is the first episode. I urge you to go back and listen to the whole thing because otherwise you won't understand this one, because this is the conclusion of the whole process. Secondly, this is not the last one. We'll have the next episode where we will discuss the conclusion, just as an overview of the whole thing. What was required? Why was this paper required? Why was a need for this research? What was it trying to answer? And some background on active inference that I learned actually from other websites, and I have a better picture of the whole scenario. But we'll discuss that later on. Let's just conclude this paper now. Last time we left at experimental issues that need to be worked out, right? Why? Because, as we all know, truth is a slippery thing. It slips out of your hand if you're not careful. You can muddy the waters. You can add a lot of noise if you're not careful. For people to take you seriously, you have to take the data seriously. All right? First step at good scientific research. Find out all the ways in which your data might be corrupted because of unforeseen consequences. Some Half-Life reference there. Half-Life is coming back. Anyway. So I missed one thing that they made sure to do. Some trials and some participants were excluded from the final data. Why? Well, some trials where the hand movement didn't cross that box, 3 degree by 6 degree box, they were removed, right? Because it's supposed to be very precise. The attenuation should only be behind the hand movement, not in the general direction of the hand movement, right? It's supposed to be really precise. So if they miss the target box, that trial is not counted. All right. Some participants were not counted. Why? Because they failed to show any improved judgment between a tough question and an easy question. What's a tough question? Almost similar contrast between the two patches is a tough question. It's hard to notice small changes in contrast, right? Easy question, high contrast change. One is very strong, one is very weak. Okay. In those cases, sorry for the noise, it's very noisy today. In those cases where there is no difference between the correctness of the between the two cases, clearly the participant is just randomly answering questions, right? Clearly they don't care about science. They don't care about crucialness of the research. We exclude them. We don't care about them. We throw them away. I think 6 participants were thrown out. Not thrown out, but their data was thrown out. Their data were thrown out. Apologies. Right. And then they do some statistical analysis, which I frankly do not really understand. This is my weak point, mathematics. It's not actually very weak. I'm not very bad with mathematics, but I am not recently. I have. It's been a long time. Let's just say that. So Hopefully, I'll give some time to the statistical analysis, how they do statistical analysis. Maybe I'll do a course on Coursera or something, and then make another podcast of understanding statistics or something like that. And then from those learnings, I can actually come back and figure out all these terms that they were using in statistical analysis. So I'll just skip the whole thing without boring you guys. There is some variance and standard deviation terms, and what else? Something called ANOVA, analysis of variance, and all those things, which we won't discuss. Conclusion of the experiment is this is the data. These are the data that came out. There was perceptible, significant, statistically significant attenuation between because of this because of the hand movement. There was a little bit of, there is some evidence of that, right? But the second experiment, the second part, the metacognition, the confidence of the person in their ability to answer these questions, that is not hampered, in the sense that their confidence matched their accuracy. If they were, because of this sensory attenuation, they got some answers wrong, let's say, they somehow knew that their answer is probably not very correct. See what I'm saying? So metacognition was not actually hampered, because they knew that their confidence was low. They knew that their answer couldn't be justified. So that knowledge means that they had similar level of metacognition as before. Now, all these is fine. The study is published. I already expected that there is some data. There is some. Is going to be there's going to be some positive results out of it. But some really interesting things come up in the conclusion and in the further studies and limitations section of the paper. First of all, we will go through them slowly. First of all, they said that it's possible to do these experiments now in this time today because of these technologies that we have, the virtual reality, and the hand tracking, and the ability to remove the hand from the visual field allows these kind of experiments that were not possible before. So this is a brave new world we are living in, where more such kind of research is possible. The attenuated stimuli and metacognitive ability is retained. These are all a part of we have already discussed that. These are all part of the conclusion. But this is where it gets really interesting. They say that sensory attenuation might be a crucial cue in recognizing voluntary versus involuntary actions for the brain. So the fact that there is sensory attenuation happening and the mind knows that the sensory attenuation is happening because metacognition is still intact, that knowledge subconsciously differentiates between the voluntariness of the action, when we feel that we are causing some action, and the involuntary actions, some spasm, right, or a reflex action caused by some touching something hot. Those are involuntary actions. They don't go through the voluntary channel, right? They say that the mind knows about the differences because of these attenuations. It's upside down, right? You wouldn't expect that on on an intelligently designed mind, probably that wouldn't happen. It's a strange way to figure out whether it's voluntary or involuntary, whether the sensory attenuation happens or not, right? And why do they think that is the case? Because this is extremely interesting. Wait for it. Schizophrenic patients have a deficit in attenuation. This is a double negative, deficit in attenuation, which means that in some cases it has been found that their own hand movement, schizophrenic patients' hand movement might not attenuate visual sensitivity, causing them to think that this is actually not their doing. It's an involuntary action, and there is something else, someone else, or there is an external force acting on the, there is someone else present. There is this dreadful feeling of not being in control because of the lack of attenuation, sensory attenuation. And this is fascinating. This is like, it reminds me of these nerves that go through from it. They have to go from our lungs to our brain, but they take this long circuitous path through our abdomen. Why? Because that's what happened when because of evolution. It's all imperfect. The imperfection of evolution, the vestigious organs. What is that term? I don't remember. The tailbone and the the choking problem, the windpipe being close to the food pipe, and that causes probably some deaths every year, right? All those imperfections. This is one of those imperfectly designed. Mind is also imperfectly designed. It's up in a way. It feels very upside down. That attenuation is the reason for the perception of voluntary action as opposed to involuntary action. This is fascinating. I'm really excited about what lies in store for me next, because active inference theory, I have tried to understand. It is related to homeostasis, which was an interesting topic that I read about from, I don't know much about it yet because I haven't read the whole book, but the book is called Strange Order of Things by Antonio Damasio. And he talks about the fact that how homeostasis is the cause for feelings and emotions in all beings, from bacteria to, bacteria don't have feelings, but they have homeostasis. The need for homeostasis is still there. So the idea is that the same mechanism creates feelings and thoughts in higher order brain functions, or higher organisms. That is interesting, right? There are these alternatives that they talk about. How else can you explain the data that came out of this research? There is this general suppression theory that they first say, if there is some movement that is being done by the hand, by our own body, the mind automatically generally suppresses the visual sensations, visual stimulus. But that's not the case for the whole view. Otherwise, both the Gabor patches would be affected, but that's not the case. Some people might say that, or you might also say that, okay, only the half of the view, the hemi view, the one hemispherical view is affected. But that is also ruled out because of those failed experiments, not experiments, but the failed trials. The case where hand doesn't exactly overlap the target rectangle. Even in those cases, attenuation doesn't happen, but it should happen if this theory is correct. So this must not be the case. There is another theory called efference copy theory, which I don't really understand, so I'll skip this. Maybe some other time I'll try to understand this. What are the limitations of this experiment? The limitations: eye movement wasn't tracked, so who knows where they were looking, right? That's one. The second, and there were some other limitations, but they said what is the further research questions? What are further research questions? What are the further areas where you can design this research? One example, very interesting, was the stable hand. Instead of moving hand, if the hand is just stable on top of the stimulus, ideally, because of the active inference theory, not ideally, because of according to this active inference theory, the attenuation should reduce over time because there is no movement. That is something to be tested. Agency: instead of you moving your hand, maybe some experimenter is moving your hand towards the stimulus. How does that affect the visual attenuation, the sensory attenuation? Needs to be studied. Then I think there were other more, but let's just stop here. It's been 16 minutes. And tomorrow, so this is again just before me saying goodbye to you, I'll just wax philosophical a little bit on the beauty of research. I mean, it is highly technical, and I can see why people would find it boring. And I did find it boring in my youth to study such technical terms and technical things. But I have come to realize the slipperiness of truth. Like, there is, because of the internet, because of our phones, because of these social media posts that just go through, 90% of them are fake. The need for truth, need to understand the truth, was vivid in my mind and has become vivid in my mind. And this question of how to know what the truth is, this helplessness in the face of this deluge of fake news and hyperbole in media, made my mind thirst for some way in which I can find the truth. And this is what it takes to find the truth. This kind of statistical analysis is required. The world is a complex system, and it's a miracle that we are even able to know this much. Like, we are not made to do that. Our evolutionary history is not about knowing the truth, it's about survival. The fact that we can even do this much is miraculous. And I want to know more about this process. I want to learn this process, and I want to take part in it if I can. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe I am still able to learn this way of finding the truth. Maybe you don't need to be a part of a university to start doing this. Maybe you don't need to be a paid scientist to start doing this. Maybe general public, layperson can do these things and figure out for themselves the nature of finding the truth. And on that note, I'll stop and see you tomorrow.